In July 1944, as World War II neared its end, the world's financial leaders gathered in a small hotel in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. Nations were exhausted, currencies broken, gold scattered across oceans. Out of the ashes, they sought order, a new system that could anchor the world's money. What they created wasn't just policy, it was faith, cast in gold, wrapped in the promise of American strength. The United States emerged from the war not just victorious, but rich beyond measure. 2/3 of the world's gold rested in its vaults. Its factories roared, while others lay in ruins. At Bretton Woods, America offered stability in exchange for trust. The dollar would be as good as gold, and all other currencies would be tied to it. The dollar became not just money, but the world's heartbeat. For a generation, gold and paper walked hand in hand. Central banks across Europe, Asia, and beyond held dollars, knowing they could be redeemed at $35 per ounce. It was elegant in its simplicity and divine in its ambition, a system of discipline in a world of chaos. Yet beneath that beauty lay a silent imbalance, growing larger with every printed note and every American promise. The genius of Bretton Woods was its illusion of permanence. Gold would restrain nations from printing too much, anchoring ambition to reality. But restraint is rare in politics. The U.S. had pledged convertibility, yet its power tempted it to defy its own chains. As the Cold War deepened, America spent freely to rebuild Europe, to fight wars, to lead the free world. Dollars flowed outward, but the gold stayed still. By the late 1950s, foreign nations held more dollars than America had gold to redeem. Quiet doubts spread through central banks. Could the promise truly be kept? The system's beauty became its flaw. Confidence was its only foundation, and confidence can vanish overnight. Bretton Woods, born from war, now faced its own invisible battlefield: trust. Charles de Gaulle saw the illusion first. In 1965, the French president publicly demanded gold in exchange for America's paper. "We prefer the real to the promise," he said, sending French warships to New York Harbor to retrieve bullion. It was a symbolic act, but also a warning. The empire of paper was vulnerable to the weight of truth. As gold drained from Fort Knox, the American treasury grew nervous. Each redemption chipped away at the myth that the dollar was invincible. Economists whispered about a run on the dollar, the modern echo of a bank run, but on a global scale. Yet politicians refused to tighten belts or balance budgets. They believed the world had no alternative. And for a time, they were right. The 1960s became an age of contradictions. Prosperity boomed under the glow of consumerism, while the war in Vietnam devoured billions. The Great Society promised welfare at home and strength abroad. America wanted both guns and butter, and paid for both with printed money. The rest of the world watched as the world's banker turned into its largest debtor. Speculators began to sense blood in the water. London bankers traded dollars for gold faster than Washington could react. Switzerland and West Germany redeemed theirs quietly. Gold, meant to be the system's anchor, was becoming its escape hatch. The Bretton Woods system trembled as confidence, the currency of all currencies, began to evaporate. By 1971, America faced a choice between two impossible truths: protect its gold or preserve its illusion of control. Inflation was climbing, deficits were widening, and foreign claims on gold exceeded what remained in the vaults. The American promise that each dollar was worth its weight in gold had become unsustainable. The facade was cracking. On August 15, 1971, President Richard Nixon went on national television. His words were calm, measured, and historic. "I have directed the Secretary of the Treasury to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold." It was the most important lie ever told with the word temporary. The gold window closed and would never open again. Overnight, the world entered uncharted waters. The Bretton Woods system, built on the discipline of gold, was gone. The dollar, now untethered, became pure faith, backed only by confidence in the United States itself. Money was no longer a promise of metal, but a promise of trust. And trust, as history always reminds us, is fragile. The shock reverberated instantly. European currencies scrambled, gold prices surged, and markets convulsed. Economists debated whether the age of order had ended or merely evolved. Nixon framed it as liberation. We are freeing the American economy. Yet, freedom without discipline often becomes excess. A new world of floating exchange rates was born, unpredictable and untamed. The immediate years after Bretton Woods were chaotic. The dollar plunged, inflation soared, and faith in paper weakened. Oil exporting nations, wary of the dollar's decline, raised prices, birthing the 1973 oil crisis. The petrodollar emerged from this chaos, a deal trading U.S. military protection for oil priced exclusively in dollars. Once again, America reinvented its dominance through necessity. What gold once guaranteed, power now enforced. The U.S. no longer needed to defend its currency with metal, it defended it with might. Every barrel of oil sold in dollars renewed global demand. The dollar, unbacked yet irresistible, became the oxygen of modern trade. And so the world accepted paper once more, not because it trusted it, but because it needed it. The 1970s taught the world an ancient truth. Money is not metal, but memory. Gold had anchored trust through centuries. Now trust itself became the new gold. Inflation became the ghost haunting every economy, reminding nations what happens when value is divorced from restraint. The lesson was clear, but rarely learned. Power can print paper, but never confidence. In the 1980s, the Federal Reserve, under Paul Volcker, fought inflation with brutal precision. Interest rates soared above 15%, crushing borrowing and cooling speculation. The pain was immense, but discipline returned, at least temporarily. For the first time since the gold window closed, faith in the dollar revived not from gold, but from courage. Meanwhile, other nations adapted. Japan rose on exports, Europe deepened integration, and developing economies learned the hard way. Debt in dollars meant dependency. The US could print the world's reserve currency, others could only earn it. Bretton Woods had promised equality. The post-gold world delivered hierarchy. By the 1990s, global finance had evolved into something Bretton Woods architects could never imagine. Derivatives, hedge funds, and computer trading replaced gold bars and ledgers. The dollar's supremacy seemed absolute. Yet beneath the surface, the same old forces stirred: debt, speculation, and moral hazard. Gold was gone, but greed had found new form. When crises struck, the 1997 Asian financial crash, the dot-com collapse, the 2008 meltdown, the same question returned: what anchors money when promises break? Central banks printed trillions, nations borrowed more, and once again, the illusion of control replaced real stability. Bretton Woods had died in 1971, but its ghost still governed every bailout and every bubble. Gold, once exiled from power, became a silent witness. It never defaulted, never devalued, never lied. In vaults and mines, it reminded humanity of a rule it kept forgetting: true value doesn't need permission. Even as digital screens replaced coins and algorithms replaced bankers, gold remained a mirror reflecting our recurring arrogance. By the 2010s, the dollar reigned supreme once more. The euro had stumbled, China's yuan was still caged, and cryptocurrencies were too young to threaten the throne. Yet the empire of paper grew heavier with debt. What began as a temporary suspension in 1971 had become the foundation of a new religion: faith in fiat, belief without backing. The lesson of Bretton Woods was supposed to be balance. Instead, it became dependence. Every global crisis since then has been met not with restraint, but with more money. The gold anchor was replaced by a printing press, and the discipline of scarcity by the politics of abundance. We traded limitation for illusion, and called it progress. As technology accelerated, so did velocity, the speed of money, of speculation, of loss. Markets once tied to tangible goods now spun around algorithms trading in microseconds. Value became abstract, profit became momentum, and the old virtues of patience and prudence faded. The Bretton Woods promise to make finance serve humanity was now reversed. Every empire builds a currency, and every currency builds a myth. The myth of Bretton Woods was that order could be engineered, but like all myths, it unraveled when belief faltered. The dollar survived not because it was honest, but because no rival was stronger. It was trust by default, the most dangerous kind. Today, as debt towers over GDP and markets soar on liquidity alone, the echoes of 1971 grow louder. History doesn't repeat, it accumulates. Every era borrows from the past until the weight becomes unbearable. The world has replaced the gold standard with the confidence standard, and confidence is the rarest metal of all. The architects of Bretton Woods sought peace through stability. They feared the chaos that had followed World War I, devaluation, inflation, despair. Their design worked for a time, but like all human systems, it carried within it the seed of its undoing, the belief that control could be permanent, and that wealth could be managed without humility. When Nixon closed the gold window, he didn't just end convertibility, he ended accountability. Governments discovered they could spend without restraint, borrow without consequence, and inflate without collapse, at least for a while. The dollar became both weapon and drug, enabling wars, bubbles, and miracles of consumption that defied arithmetic. 50 years later, we live in the world that decision created. Floating currencies, endless credit, invisible borders of capital. The global economy runs on belief that debt will be repaid, that inflation will remain tame, that faith will hold. Bretton Woods was meant to save the world from chaos. Instead, it merely postponed it. And yet every cycle ends the same way, not in crisis, but in forgetting. We forget that money is not value, that paper is not promise, that trust cannot be legislated. The gold window may be gone, but its lesson endures like a whisper in the vaults of history. Every illusion of permanence ends when the truth demands payment. In the wake of Nixon's announcement, the markets trembled. Traders across London, Paris, and Tokyo scrambled to reprice currencies no longer anchored to gold. Overnight, faith replaced metal as the standard of value. It was a silent revolution, no battles, no bloodshed, yet the world order had shifted as surely as tectonic plates beneath the ocean. The US dollar, once convertible to gold, now floated freely. Its worth would depend not on a vault, but on trust, on the belief that America's promises still held weight. And because the world's debts and contracts were priced in dollars, the global system adjusted, not by choice, but by necessity. Central banks convened emergency meetings. Some hoarded their remaining gold, others sold it, uncertain of what lay ahead. The IMF scrambled to redefine the meaning of reserves. Economists called it a new era of flexibility. But for ordinary people, it meant inflation, uncertainty, and prices that no longer obeyed familiar rules. Gold, freed from its fixed price, soared. In months, it leapt from $35 to over $100 per ounce, defying every prediction. It was as if centuries of restraint had finally been released. The metal, long chained by governments, reclaimed its ancient power to measure fear and greed. Meanwhile, the dollar held, not because of gold, but because of habit. The world was too entangled with American finance to abandon it. Oil contracts, trade debts, military aid, all denominated in green paper. Thus began the petrodollar era, where oil replaced gold as the pillar of global stability. Saudi Arabia struck a deal with Washington. Price oil only in dollars, and America would guarantee protection. It was a quiet pact that reshaped the century, a fusion of energy and currency, of politics and petroleum. The Bretton Woods order was gone, but a new hierarchy was already rising from its ashes. Europe watched in unease. Their currencies wobbled, inflation gnawed at savings, and old rivalries resurfaced beneath economic distress. Some leaders dreamed of a unified monetary system to protect against the dollar's volatility, the first whispers of what would one day become the euro. In Asia, Japan, and South Korea surged ahead. They adapted quickly, turning cheap currencies into engines of export growth. Factories roared, ships overflowed with goods, and the balance of power and trade began to tilt eastward. The floating exchange era had unleashed a new form of competition, currency as weapon. For the United States, the short-term pain gave way to unexpected advantage. A weaker dollar made its exports more competitive, while debts denominated in its own currency became easier to bear. The system America broke had, paradoxically, made America stronger. But there was a cost: inflation. By the mid-1970s, U.S. citizens faced soaring prices, stagnant wages, and eroding faith in the dollar. The gold window had closed, but ghosts of its discipline haunted the economy. "We are all Keynesians now," economists quipped, yet the bills of that philosophy were coming due. Across the decade, gold became a mirror for anxiety. Investors who once mocked the metal now hoarded it, driving prices skyward. Governments tried to restrain it with regulation and rhetoric, but gold had become more than a commodity. It was a verdict on leadership itself. In 1979, inflation reached double digits, confidence faltered. The Federal Reserve, under Paul Volcker, took drastic action, raising interest rates to punishing levels. Factories closed, unemployment spiked, and a generation learned that monetary freedom had its price: discipline through pain. Gold peaked at $850 per ounce in 1980, a monument to lost faith. But as Volcker's measures took hold, inflation finally broke. The dollar, like a phoenix, rose again, not gilded by metal, but by credibility. The lesson was stark. Stability could exist without gold, but only through trust, earned the hard way. By the 1980s, markets had adjusted to floating exchange rates. Computers began to track real-time trades. Finance grew faster than industry. The Bretton Woods era had given way to something intangible, a digital, debt-driven capitalism that no longer needed the shine of bullion. Gold receded into vaults, a relic of caution. Nations still held it, but few spoke of returning to the standard. Instead, they embraced paper promises, derivatives, and complex systems of credit. Money had become an idea, and like all ideas, it was both powerful and fragile. For historians, Bretton Woods became a symbol of human ambition, the dream of a perfectly ordered world where currency could be as steady as morality. But reality proved otherwise. Order gives way to chaos. Certainty dissolves into choice. The system's collapse was not failure, but transformation. Decades later, the echoes remain. Every financial crisis, every inflationary wave, every debate about Bitcoin or central bank digital currencies, they all trace back to that moment in 1971, when Nixon severed gold's chain and let the dollar drift into the unknown. In retrospect, the Bretton Woods system was both cage and cradle. It restrained excess, yet prevented adaptation. Its destruction unleashed instability, but also innovation. Like Prometheus stealing fire, humanity gained power over money, but lost innocence. The IMF, born to uphold fixed rates, reinvented itself as a lender of last resort. Nations that once feared losing gold now feared losing credit. The metrics had changed, but dependency remained. Only the medium evolved from metal to mathematics. By the dawn of the 1990s, gold had lost its monetary crown. Yet in times of turmoil, wars, recessions, crises, it still glimmered in the background, a reminder that trust can never be fully printed. The world had moved on, but gold had not forgotten. The collapse of Bretton Woods also marked a shift in global power. The United States emerged not as the guardian of gold, but as the issuer of belief, the one nation whose deficits were accepted as wealth. Its promise became the world's foundation. But faith, like credit, is finite. As debts mounted and markets grew complex, the dollar's dominance became both strength and burden. "Our currency, your problem," one U.S. official famously quipped, a truth both arrogant and accurate. Europe responded by forging unity. The Maastricht Treaty laid the groundwork for a shared currency, a new experiment in trust. The euro was not backed by gold, but by political will, an attempt to bind nations through finance where history had failed through war. Meanwhile, emerging markets learned hard lessons. Without fixed anchors, speculative flows could devastate economies overnight. The Asian financial crisis of 1997 was a reminder that freedom in currency came with vulnerability, volatility as the new normal. Gold reappeared not as currency, but as symbol. Central banks began quietly buying again, sensing that in an era of limitless printing, scarcity had value. The old metal, once dethroned, waited patiently, timeless, incorruptible, eternal. In the 21st century, money became code. Algorithms priced assets, bots traded currencies, and blockchain promised to decentralize trust itself. Yet beneath the digital revolution lay the same question Bretton Woods once tried to answer: what gives money meaning? The 2008 financial crisis proved that even without gold, systems can collapse under the weight of greed and leverage. Central banks responded by printing trillions, reviving the economy, and raising a haunting echo of 1971, the endless expansion of money without anchor. Bitcoin emerged as a rebellion against that order, a digital gold for a post-trust age. It mirrored the same longing that birthed Bretton Woods: stability, fairness, control. Yet it too faced paradoxes. Freedom invites chaos, and purity invites corruption. As of today, gold still gleams in vaults, silent and heavy. The dollar still reigns, though whispers of decline grow louder, and the world still searches for equilibrium between discipline and desire, order and freedom, reality and illusion. When gold broke the Bretton Woods system, it did more than end an era. It exposed the truth that money is not metal, but faith, a mirror reflecting the human soul. Empires may rise on gold or paper, but all stand or fall by belief.